Seems like sometimes lately I kind of want to live in a bubble forever, too. Hello, fellow plant people. Welcome back if you're returning to my channel. If you're new, my name is Jen and I go by The Leafy Geek here, also on Instagram. And today I just wanted to share with you what I've got going on and growing under glass, and I guess technically under plastic. I'm going to share with you what I have growing in my terrariums and in my cloches and in my propagation box. There are certain benefits to using terrariums and or vivariums and or cloches with certain plants that have a higher sensitivity to regular household conditions, meaning that they don't necessarily thrive in our regular household humidity, which tends to be a lot lower than their conditions in their natural environment that they really benefit from. I'm talking about certain begonias, I'm talking about certain Hoyas. Yes, Hoyas, I'll show you those in a second. Certain jewel orchids, you know, I see a lot of begonias under glass in terrariums. I don't happen to have too many begonias myself, and I don't really have any that meet that criteria, but I'm also just getting into begonias myself. So we'll see what the future holds there. There are so many great terrarium tours and explorations on Plant YouTube. I will certainly mention a few down in the description below from some content creators that I've really enjoyed their videos on terrariums. So I'll make sure to link that below. But today it's just kind of a casual tour and a chat about what I've got going on with mine. I tend to view a terrarium as something that I plant something in. So the plant is actually planted into soil or some sort of growing medium within that terrarium space. A cloche, by contrast, is glass or a container that encloses the plant, but it's not necessarily the planted environment. They're not establishing roots in the base of the cloche necessarily. A cloche is something you can pick up and remove from the plant, whereas a terrarium, it's actually living in the terrarium. It's planted into it. That's my definition. I don't know if that is science. I don't know if that is the accepted definition of what a terrarium is, but it's certainly the way I kind of differentiate between those two situations. So I do have an example of a terrarium, and then I also have, essentially it could be a terrarium, but right now it's being used as a cloche. It's being used as like an enclosed space. I don't think it's big enough to be considered a greenhouse. If you look right over my shoulder, you can see it. It's that IKEA greenhouse terrarium cloche. What is it? I don't know, but I'll show you. And then I also want to show you my grow box, my propagation box. I've got some new things going on in there, so definitely have some updates in there as well. Some good, some not so good. As far as the reasons why the plants are in there, I use either a cloche or terrarium or a propagation box for a number of reasons. The propagation box I definitely use, as the name implies, to propagate my plants, to create smaller new plants from cuttings of my larger plants. So that is kind of a healthy use for it. It doesn't necessarily imply that anything's going wrong with the plant. I'm just making new plants. Another reason I use the propagation box, mainly because of its size. It's just a decent size. It's one of those big Tupperware containers. Mine is anyway. But the reason that I also use it is to rehab plants. So if I have plants that aren't doing well, or I'm noticing they're in my home space and they're really just not doing well, leaves are crisping up, they look weird, or they're just not growing, not thriving, I will try and boost their humidity by getting them into that enclosed environment and then fostering potentially some new growth by increasing those humidity levels for plants that seem to prefer that. And then the other, the other reason that I use that type of setup is on a more permanent basis. Like from doing my research on that particular plant, I know that they are going to need an environmental situation that my home just can't accommodate. But if I still want to try the plant, I want the plant to be able to at least have a chance at potentially growing and or thriving. So I try and recreate its preferred conditions that way by using one of those things, or my propagation box. My propagation box I use less for that purpose. The plants that I know are going to be living in that situation on a permanent basis kind of get their own fancy designed setup, and I'll show you some examples of those in a minute. So I think without further ado, let's just get into the tour. I'm going to show you around, show you what's going on. Okay, I'm going to show you the propagation box first. It's looking pretty full right now, for a number of reasons. Got kind of a mix of things going on in here as far as the purposes go for why these plants are in here. So let's just start with the cuttings. Those are the fun ones, the fun reasons. I'm propagating, I'm making new plants, yay. So we'll start in this corner here. This is my old silver dollar vine that had been outside for a long time, and it got hit with a pest, and I treated it for the pest, and it just was slowly declining. A big part of the plant was. So I took a bunch of cuttings and of course made sure that they were pest free, and then have started rooting them. So there was a few cuttings that I actually was able to plant up, and I'm going to be planting these once they root a little bit better and kind of create a bigger new plant. So it's still with me, it's just in a different form right now. Then in this corner, some more propagations going on. This is sphagnum moss. Obviously you guys can tell that. I tend to use either moss or water for propagating. I've been a big advocate of water propagating since I started propagating plants, but I switched to moss for a few different reasons for certain types of plants. Mainly like my woodier stemmed Hoyas I noticed weren't rooting really well in water. So that's kind of what I've been doing there. And also some of the more succulent type varieties and like the sticks, I've been using the moss for, which has worked really well, as you can see. So these are leafless Discidia stems that did root. I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. But then also you see this is a little Philodendron brantianum that ended up rooting out of, it was just like a stick with a node on it and a tiny nub for like an aerial root. And it produced a leaf. So that was kind of a cool experiment. And then I also have a couple of cuttings of my Hoya Bella in here. My old Hoya Bella kind of kicked the bucket, so I took a bunch of cuttings. These were the most recent ones that I took from the plant as it moved toward the light. But these cuttings from that same plant have been in here for a little while. And as you can see, they have some roots. So that was a water propagation for this Bella. I should probably plant these up soon. Then over here, some more additional water cuttings. This is a Cissus quadrangularis. This broke off of my big plant, so I just stuck it in here to see what it would do. And I think we've got some roots on there. They're looking a little weird. Might need to change the water. And then I have this Discidia that is also rooting. And these roots, this plant was originally in soil. I pulled it out and stuck it in water to kind of try and rehab it a little bit because the leaves were shrinking and shriveling up. So that's what that black stuff is. It's just extra soil. And then over here, I've got a Scindapsus pictus silverian. That's looking really good. Got some good roots on there. Probably have to get that potted up soon too. On this side here, this is a Hoya odorata cutting. Again, this was just a cutting. I just took it to see if I could make my odorata a little bit bushier. And yeah, that did really well. This hasn't been in there that long. You can see I've got some algae growth on some of these vessels here. I haven't found that to be harmful really in any way. It's just a little gross. This is kind of moving into the rehab territory now. So this particular stem of my Hoya carnosa compacta variegata was getting wrinkly leaves, and I saw that the roots were kind of dried out on the stem, so I removed it and did the water rehab here in this prop box, and it's doing quite well. It looks like some new roots are popping out. Look at that leaf. It's so flippin' pink. It's very cool. And then similar things going on here with my Hoya Chelsea. I had to kind of disassemble my Hoya Chelsea because the original roots were pretty rough. They were in rough shape. Oops, sorry about that. Bumped the camera. As you can see, so I had 2 vines of Hoya Chelsea that were pretty considerable in size. But again, the roots, if you don't have roots, you don't have roots, then you don't have a plant. So I took several cuttings, made several cuttings out of those 2 vines and stuck them in water. So everybody's rooting, I think. Let me check this. Oh yeah, doing pretty good. So again, Hoya Chelsea has lived on in a new form. So we'll probably get to pot that up soon too. And then I do also have this. This was a cutting that I had to take of a regular Hoya carnosa compacta green that I had gotten from a vendor, and the plant was basically dead upon arrival, and so I took a bunch of cuttings from it, and this is the one that survived. So this is potted up in soil. It is rooted. It just hasn't done much. I've kind of been waiting until I can pot it or repot it with my larger carnosa compacta. I have a larger green one. And then this is what remains of my variegated Million Hearts Discidia. Not a lot to look at, but it is alive. Living in the prop box, because that's where it's happiest, apparently. And then, you guys, this is a very sad story. Yeah, I almost don't want to talk about it, but I will. This was my Hoya callistophylla. This is basically a #1 wish list plant for me. I scored it from a vendor that I often shop with and trust implicitly with the quality of their plants. It had to be some sort of freak thing that happened with this one. The roots really weren't there. They really weren't developed possibly enough. I don't know. Or they rotted in transit, and it just slowly declined over the course of, well, I guess it wasn't that slowly. It was over the course of a couple weeks. And I noticed because the leaves started yellowing and shriveling up. And so then I pulled it out of the soil. I hadn't taken it out of the soil it had arrived in. And there were basically no more roots. And the bottom part of the stem was starting to rot as well. So quickly cut it and put rooting hormone powder on it that can tend to prevent that root rot, and then got it in here. Got it in moss, got it in here. And this used to be one plant. This was the bottom part of the node. The main node is basically right under the stems here. And this one was just like right above it. So very, very small, small amount of wiggle room there. So I had kept it initially still as one plant, and then the whole stem rotted right up to the node. So I had to cut it again, and I'm basically running out of places to cut. So for insurance, I took another cutting and I kind of separated those 2 kind of segments of leaves, and did the whole process over again. Things seem to be stabilized. I'm scared to check this. I have not looked for any roots yet, and I've had it in here for a couple of weeks now. So I'm just going to leave them alone and see what happens, because I will be so sad. I will be so sad if I lose this plant. But anyway, all you can do is try, right? So that is the current state of my propagation box. This tends to stay closed. I don't really have a lid for it. All of the lids that I have for this type of plastic container are opaque. They're like either purple or blue. I don't have a clear one. So I had MacGyvered some plastic wrap. You can see I need to dust this off. Which, you know, it probably doesn't hold in as much humidity as I would like it to, but it does what I need it to, I guess, for now. I'm always looking for suggestions or ways to improve this. So if you guys have any ideas, aside from just getting a plastic cover for it, just let me know. I'd like to hear your thoughts. But that is the grow box. That it is. Okay, now we get to go over to the fun stuff and look at this. So this little guy is what I got from IKEA. You've seen this probably a lot. Has these doors that lift up and over. Glass sides. And I'm certain that you can plant things into this. I have not. I'm using it, I guess, as a mini greenhouse is what it is. I think it is called the soccer. This is what it is. So I'm assuming you can use it as a terrarium. You can plant things into the base. It's a metal base, metal frame, glass panes. Actually, I think a lot of these materials kind of reflect, I know they have that awesome greenhouse cabinet now that I've been eyeing that everybody seems to be getting right now, and I'm jealous of all of you. But this is kind of serving a purpose for what it is right now. And I've got some Hoyas in here. I think these are all Hoyas in here right now. Some of my more sensitive Hoyas. I've got a few cuttings that I moved into here to see if I could boost some root growth on them. Those are cuttings I got from Jaya's Jungle. I've got my sigillatus in here. I risked moving it because it started growing a stem with leaves, and I wanted to really encourage that and keep it going, possibly through the winter even. We'll see. But I figured it used to be like right there and like right on the outside of where it currently is. So I thought, you know, not changing a whole lot. So hopefully that does it even better. Then I've got my Hoya loheri. This is one of my Finlaysonii plants that is growing a vine. Doing awesome. A new Hoya that I got recently that was kind of acclimating. I moved my Hoya caudata in here because I figured that would like a boost. And then this one, let me see if I can get this one. Tell you what it is. This guy is my Hoya sabah. This is my sabah. This was one of a group of Hoyas that I got from Unsolicited Plant Talks a little while back. All of those other plants, I think I got 6 of them, all of the others, the 5 others, had growth happening, but this one has kind of stalled out. It always only had 1 leaf, and I noticed that it developed some sort of discoloration around the base of the leaf, so I'm not really sure what that's about. Might have to investigate this one a little bit further just to see what's going on with it, but I thought maybe moving it in here would help. Not real sure. That discoloration kind of freaks me out a little bit. I might move it into my prop box just to be safe. And then, yeah, I've just got some little baby Hoyas in here that are kind of waiting to acclimate. And once I see that they're starting to grow, oh, I think this one is actually the Affinity Fitchii one. It's growing right here. Got a vine. So once I see that, that's a good encouraging sign for me to kind of move them to where the rest of my smaller Hoya live in my plant room. So it's kind of almost a staging area in a way for a lot of these, just to kind of harden them up a little bit, get them growing, and then we'll send them on their way to be enjoyed with the rest of the crew. Okay, this is one of my 2 glass terrariums. I call these terrariums because the plants aren't leaving unless they're dead. That's kind of morbid, but it's true. They are of the type of plant that just generally won't do well outside of this setup. So this is where they'll be for their lives, and that's that. So I call this a terrarium. I think I got these glass jars, they're cookie jars from Target. I think I've heard Not Dude, I know you guys know Not Dude, refer to them as the magic cookie jar. And they really are. They do a lot of good for plants that need that extra humidity. But I have my Hoya imbricata in here, and this plant, when I got it, was a cutting. It had those 2 leaves and those 2 leaves only, and it still does. It has both of the leaves. It didn't have any of those vines though. So you can see there's a vine. Oh, I can't really show you that way. This one, and then there are 2 kind of shooting off, you know, from right here. I don't know if you can see these 2. There's 1, 2. So it has 3 vines that it's put out. I mean, for a long time, when I first got it, I've had this plant for probably a year and a half, and it did nothing. Obviously, it was a cutting. It was rooting. It was growing its roots. It was getting, you know, established. I had it in that terrarium originally. It's a hot mess. As you can see, there's a bunch of like growth in there from the sphagnum moss. I can only assume it's the sphagnum moss that grew all of that green, which was kind of cool, but it also is kind of distracting from the star of the show, which is this guy. So recently decided to upgrade him. I had a bigger container and figured when I saw him start to vine out a little bit, I was like, well, he needs some more room to grow. So this is just cork bark, and this is obviously sphagnum. I do have the imbricata itself, the roots, planted in a very small plastic nursery pot under the sphagnum. So when I, you know, obviously it's enclosed a lot of the time. I really don't have to water this that much. But when I do add a little bit of moisture, it will, you know, moisten the soil, but I shouldn't need to do much to it. Really, the sphagnum moss, it just kind of takes care of itself. It's very self-sustaining, I've found. So imbricata is really cool because it's a shingling Hoya. It will, if you give it the materials, the tools to shingle, it will do so. So I gave it this awesome gnarly piece of cork bark to see if it would kind of amble up, and it seems to be doing that, which is really neat. I do have a little ornament there, which I find kind of funny, and there's definitely room if I wanted to plant something else in it, which I've been thinking about. You know, it is the imbricata's house, but something else in there might be kind of cool. We'll see what it does. If it decides to kind of vine into the sphagnum and do stuff down there, I won't mess with it too much. But just flipping around to the back, I've got it so the cork bark is resting on these, just kind of a bed of these clear glass marbles, which, you know, obviously it's a self-watering enclosed ecosystem in there. So the cork bark eventually is going to decompose. It's going to decompose. But hopefully by setting it kind of on top of the water level, the water level in there isn't that high, the moisture level from the bottom, this kind of creates a barrier there. So hopefully by having it sit on top of that, it will kind of decompose less slowly, or less, it will decompose less quickly. Slower. It'll decompose slower. Oh my God, English. But yeah, I love this setup. I just think it's so cool looking from the sides. Just looks so rad in there. And yeah, I really do think maybe I will add something else in there. So if you have any suggestions about what you would put into this terrarium right here, let me know. See what I can do. And then next door from my imbricata terrarium is my jewel orchid terrarium. This is a wish list plant for me. It's been on my list for kind of a while and just found it fairly recently. This is my Macotes petola, my lightning jewel orchid. Check out the leaves on that little beauty. Yeah, I love this plant. Love it the minute I opened the box. But it is in pure sphagnum. So this setup is a little bit different. I read that these jewel orchids can do pretty darn awesome in sphagnum alone. I've seen a lot of people do them that way. And I just have a layer, because this is kind of an interesting shaped bottom of the terrarium, and it's obviously it's fillable. It was hollow. It wasn't a solid glass base. I put a layer of perlite in there. It's kind of like a water barrier layer, and then I have the sphagnum sitting on top, and some ornaments in there, some shells and some white stones. But then the star of the show obviously is the orchid, and it has a new leaf coming out. That's pretty cool. That is pretty awesome. This seems to be pretty stable. From when I received it, I think I've had this for a couple of weeks now, and it really is doing quite well. That leaf continues to emerge, which to me is a good sign. It's not like turning to mush or wilting or anything. And the base looked pretty good. The roots looked good when I unpacked it. So yay for wish list plants. Let's just look at the leaves one more time. So pretty. So pretty. God. And then here, you guys, is the potential. I've got some unoccupied glass vessels that I will be experimenting with in the future. This one I still have to clean out since Imbricata upgraded. But then I tend to set my terrariums here. I have a nice grow light right here, an aspect light. Terrarium plants, I mean, it's kind of hit or miss with lighting. You don't want too strong of light or direct sunlight, because you don't want the insides to cook. The glass will magnify that heat pretty quickly. So I found that either in a north window or under a grow light, or a combination of both, works really well. Mine are obviously in the interior of a room. That's a north facing window there where my grow box is. But because of this light, these guys have done really well here. So no complaints there. But yeah, let me know what you guys have going on for your terrarium setups. I'd be really interested if you post a comment or something, just sharing what you grow in yours and how that's worked for you. I'd love to hear about that. So yeah, someday you will be full. Well, guys, that's pretty much it. It's kind of a small setup right now. As you could see, I do have some room for growth, some extra real estate that's available for some of those more finicky, humidity-loving plants that are out there and that are actually piquing my interest now. As I mentioned before, I am starting to appreciate and get into begonias a little bit. Not gonna go heavy-handed right now. Obviously, it's winter here. That's a whole other video entirely, so stay tuned. But I am getting into begonias. They're just a really interesting plant. There's a lot of variety there, and I never really thought I'd be able to grow something like that in my home. But these tools have basically shown me that I have the wherewithal to be able to maybe try. So that's what I'm gonna do, and stay tuned for that. But really, it's just kind of an easy way to rehab plants, to get, some plants that might not do as well thriving, and getting some growth out of those types of plants, because that is what it's all about. So until next time, you guys, I hope you're doing well, and of course, as always, enjoy your plants.